You've been there. I mean, I know you've been there because every single one of us who handles the biblical text has been
Oh,
there.
absolutely.
It's Thursday afternoon. The coffee in that mug on your desk has gone completely cold, right? And you are just staring at a densely packed paragraph in the Greek New Testament.
Staring into the abyss.
Exactly. You've got BDUG open, your exegetical commentaries are stacked up high, and you have dutifully, I mean painstakingly, parsed every single verb down to its root.
Tense, voice, mood, the
Yeah.
whole 9 yards.
Right. You can spot a second aorist active participle from a mile away. You know what the words mean in isolation. But then you look at your blank sermon manuscript or your lesson plan, and you just hit a wall.
Yeah, the classic Thursday wall.
You have this massive pile of grammatical Lego bricks scattered all over your office floor, but you realize you have absolutely no blueprint for the house. The actual thrust of the passage, like the breathing life of it, it just feels totally out of reach.
It's a really profound sort of paralysis, isn't it?
Yeah.
And honestly, it's completely systemic to how we are trained.
How so?
Well, we spend years in seminary learning how to treat the Greek text like a dead butterfly pinned to a display board.
Wow, yeah. A dead specimen.
Right. We are taught to identify the genus and species of every single word, separating them out with scalpels. We isolate a noun, define its case, and move on.
Which is helpful, but
But language, and particularly the Koine Greek of the New Testament, was never designed to be a static specimen on a corkboard. It's a living, breathing, highly interactive event.
an event. I like that.
Yeah, we learn the morphology perfectly, but we often miss the discourse, the actual social transaction happening between the author and the audience.
Which is exactly why I wanted to pull these specific sources for our deep dive today. We really need a new blueprint.
We do, definitely.
So we are going to look at the text through the lens of systemic functional linguistics.
SFL.
Right, specifically drawing from M.A.K. Halliday and Christian Matheson's work, particularly their chapter called Clause as Exchange.
It's a game changer.
It is. Now, I know dropping systemic functional linguistics in the first few minutes sounds like a fast track to a dry academic lecture, but please stay with us.
Bear with the jargon for a minute.
Because when you apply this framework directly to the Koine Greek New Testament, it changes everything. I mean, it fundamentally alters how you view exegesis.
Completely.
We aren't just going to define terms like mood, residue, and modality. We are going to look at how these concepts force you to preach and teach the text completely differently.
To even begin that process, though, we have to rewire our basic understanding of what a sentence actually is.
Okay, lay it on us.
If you ask most people what a sentence does, they'll say it conveys information. It's a vehicle for a message.
Right, a delivery system.
Exactly. And that's true. But in Halliday's framework, it's only half the truth. Simultaneous to being a message that conveys content, every single clause is an interactive event.
An interactive event.
Yes. It is a dynamic exchange. The moment you speak or write, you are adopting a specific speech role, and the second you do that, you are actively assigning a complementary role to the person listening or reading.
So you're forcing them into a relationship.
Precisely. You are pulling them into a social matrix.
I have to pause you right there, though, because I can already hear the objections from the study.
Bring them on.
You are listening to this and you're thinking, wait a second. I am reading a letter to the Galatians written by the Apostle Paul 2 millennia ago. He is dead. The original audience is dead.
Right.
So how in the world is reading Galatians an interactive dialogue? Isn't a written text, by definition, just a static monologue? He wrote it, and we just read it.
It's the most natural objection in the world, especially for those of us who, really revere the ancient text. But it betrays a modern misunderstanding of how language actually operates.
How so? Give us an analogy.
Think about a modern equivalent. Let's say you walk into the staff kitchen at your church, and someone has left a sticky note on the refrigerator that reads, "Clean up your own mess."
Oh, the passive-aggressive church kitchen note. I know it well.
We all do. Now, the author of that note isn't in the room. It's a static piece of paper. But the moment you read it, are you in a monologue?
Definitely not. I'm feeling defensive immediately.
Exactly. You are immediately thrust into a negotiation. You have been assigned a complementary role by the grammar itself. You have to mentally accept the premise, feel guilty, get defensive, or just ignore it and leave your mug there.
So the text itself is anticipating my reaction.
Precisely. As Halliday argues, interactants co-author a text.
Co-author, that's a strong phrase.
It is, but it's true. Even in a deeply theological epistle, When Paul writes a sweeping doctrinal statement, he is mentally forcing the Roman or Ephesian church into a specific posture.
Right.
He is setting up a semantic space so that his idea can be caught, returned, smashed, or lobbed back. He is anticipating their resistance.
Like anticipating the Judaizers' counter-arguments in Galatians.
Exactly. Language is never a monologue. It is always constantly a negotiation.
That reframes things beautifully. So if we are in a negotiation, what exactly are we trading?
Commodities.
Right. Halliday introduces this idea of the semantic system of speech function. Basically, he says there are two fundamental variables in any dialogue.
Right. The initiating role and the commodity.
Yeah, first, you have the initiating role. You are either giving, inviting the listener to receive, or you are demanding, inviting the listener to give you something.
Simple enough. Giving or demanding.
And second, you have the commodity being exchanged. You're either exchanging information, which is just words, language itself, or you're exchanging goods and services.
Which means physical actions, objects, or behaviors.
Exactly. And this is where the grid materializes.
Yeah, when you intersect those roles with those commodities, you generate the four primary speech functions that govern all human interaction.
Walk us through the four.
Okay, so if you are giving goods and services, you're making an offer. Like, let me carry those commentaries for you.
That's an offer. I'm giving a service.
Right. Now, if you are demanding goods and services, you are issuing a command. Pass me that lexicon.
Got it. Those are actions.
Now look at information. If you are giving information, you are making a statement. The Greek exegesis paper is due tomorrow.
The dreaded statement.
Yeah. And finally, if you are demanding information, you are asking a question. When is the exegesis paper due?
Okay, I track with the four functions, offer, command, statement, question. But Halliday groups these into two larger supercategories, and this is the first real tool we can take into our study.
It really is the foundation.
He groups the exchanges of information statements and questions into what he calls propositions.
Right, information equals propositions.
And he groups the exchanges of goods and services, offers, and commands into proposals. So why is that distinction so critical for someone trying to outline a biblical text?
Because propositions and proposals do two fundamentally different things to reality.
How so?
A proposition is an exchange of information, right? Because it's information, it has a truth value. It can be argued over, denied, affirmed, doubted, or qualified.
Okay, give me an example.
If I say, God is sovereign, that is a proposition. You can agree with me or you can debate me. Propositions construct a worldview. They build the theological architecture.
Okay, so what about a proposal?
A proposal, on the other hand, does not have a truth value. If I say, flee from sexual immorality, that isn't true or false.
Right, you can't say false to a command.
Exactly. It is an action to be accepted, refused, or carried out. Proposals don't build the worldview. They demand that you alter your behavior in light of it.
So if I'm preparing a sermon and I don't know whether my text is primarily a series of propositions or a series of proposals, I don't actually know what the text is trying to do to the congregation.
You're flying completely blind.
Yeah, you might be aggressively demanding action when the text is actually just inviting the congregation to rest in a theological truth.
Which leads to legalistic preaching.
Oh, 100%. Or worse, you might be delivering a dry informational lecture when the text is actually a burning demand for repentance.
And that leads to dead orthodoxy.
Right, I see it. Okay, so how do we track this negotiation grammatically? Let's get into the anatomy of an argument.
Let's do it.
Halliday argues that to sustain this kind of verbal rally back and forth, a clause is structurally divided into two zones, the mood element and the residue. Help us visualize this.
Let's use the house analogy you brought up earlier.
Okay.
When you are building a house, you have the structural steel. The foundation, the load-bearing beams, the framing. That steel carries the entire weight of the structure.
If the steel fails, the house collapses.
Exactly. Then you have everything else.
Mm-hmm.
The drywall, the paint, the kitchen cabinets, the furniture.
The stuff that makes it pretty.
Right. All of that is absolutely essential for the house to function as a livable home. But none of it is holding the roof up.
Yeah.
In a sentence, the mood element is the structural steel. It carries the weight of the interactive argument. The residue is the drywall and the furniture. It holds the experiential content, but it doesn't hold the argument together.
Let's break down that steel then. The mood element's made of two parts, right?
Two parts, yeah.
The first part is the subject. Now, I want you to completely forget your middle school English class definition of the subject as just the doer of the action.
Yeah, that is way too simplistic for what is actually happening in language.
Halliday introduces a concept here that really blew my mind. Modal responsibility.
It's brilliant.
The subject isn't just the doer. The subject is the specific entity upon which the validity of the proposition rests.
This is a massive paradigm shift. Think of modal responsibility as asking, who or what is holding the bag for this claim?
Holding the bag, I like that.
Let's use a non-biblical example from the source material first, just to make it clear. Take the sentence. The Duke has given away that priceless teapot, hasn't he?
Very British example.
Very Halliday. Now, if you are the person responding to that and you want to argue, what do you argue with? You don't argue with the teapot?
Right, I don't say, no, not the teapot.
Exactly. You argue with the Duke's action. You say, no, he hasn't.
Yeah.
The Duke is the entity carrying the modal responsibility for that entire claim.
The teapot is just along for the ride. It's part of the residue.
Exactly right. And the second piece of the structural steel right next to the subject is the finite.
A finite, that's the verbal operator.
Yes.
And its job is to anchor this abstract proposition down to reality so that we can actually argue about it. It ties the claim to the here and now.
It makes it arguable.
Right. It does this through tense saying it happened in the past, present, or future, or it does it through modality measuring how probable or obligatory it is.
And vitally, the finite carries polarity.
Positive or negative.
Right. It declares whether the claim is positive or negative, it is versus it is not.
Put those two together. The subject bearing modal responsibility and the finite anchoring it in time and polarity, and you have the mood element.
Yes. In our sentence, the Duke has given away that teapot. The mood element is just two words. The Duke has.
The Duke is the subject, has is the finite.
Exactly. In a rapid-fire argument, we drop the residue entirely. The Duke has given away the teapot, hasn't he? Yes, he has.
We don't say, yes, the Duke has given away the teapot. The whole interaction hinges on the steal. He has.
Which means everything else given away that teapot is the residue.
The predicator, which is the actual lexical verb given. The complements, like the teapot. And the adjuncts, which are circumstances of time and place.
Right. The residue is the color and the furniture, but the mood element is the foundation.
Which brings us to the crucial pivot for our listeners today. This theory was developed primarily by looking at English. And in English, we negotiate this interpersonal meaning largely through syntax, meaning word order.
Syntax is everything in English.
If I put the subject before the finite he is, you instinctively know I am making a declarative statement. If I flip the syntax and put the finite before the subject is he, you instantly know I am asking a question.
The negotiation relies on where the words sit in the sentence.
And this is where the lights are going to come on for the Greek students. Koine Greek doesn't care about word order the way English does.
At all.
It is a highly inflected, morphosyntactic language. Word order in Greek is often about emphasis or topic, not about defining if a sentence is a statement or a question.
Right.
So how do we find the structural steel in Greek?
You find it baked right into the morphology of the words themselves.
Baked right in.
Yeah. In Koine Greek, the finite element, the tense, mood, person, number, and voice, is permanently fused with the predicator inside a single verbal form.
So you don't have a separate helper verb floating around like has or is.
Exactly. It's all compressed into one single word.
Okay, let's ground this in the text. Open your mental Greek New Testament to John 1.1. It's a text we all know by heart.
Oh, absolutely.
An arcade and ho logos. In the beginning was the word. If we apply SFL to this, where is the structural seal? Where is the mood element?
Let's trace it. The finite element, that anchor to reality, is embedded entirely in the verb in.
Right.
That is the third person, singular, imperfect, indicative active of eimi, the to be verb. It establishes past time and positive polarity. It was.
But to find the rest of the steel, we have to locate the modal responsibility.
Right. Who or what is the explicit subject? It's sitting right there in the nominative case.
Ho.
Elohgos, the word.
So the mood element is essentially ho Elohgos in. The word was.
Yes.
Now, let's talk about the pulpit payoff here. When you preach John 1.1, it is so easy to focus on the residue.
Very easy.
We want to talk about eng arche in the beginning and compare it to Genesis 1. And that's fine. That's the circumstantial adjunct. But if you look at the modal responsibility, you see the architectural genius of John's theology.
Oh, it's brilliant.
John doesn't put the modal responsibility on the beginning. He doesn't say the beginning contained the word.
No, he shifts the entire weight of reality. The cosmic validity of this proposition, the foundation of the universe, the reality of the incarnation, it rests squarely and exclusively on the shoulders of Holohgos.
Wow.
John vests the ultimate modal responsibility for existence itself in the person of Jesus Christ. If the word fails, the proposition fails.
The grammar itself forces the reader to reckon with the absolute supremacy of the word.
Exactly. You aren't just telling your church a story about a long time ago. You are exposing them to the grammatical reality that Jesus holds the universe together.
That gives me chills.
Yeah.
I mean, you aren't just parsing "een" as an imperfect verb to pass a seminary quiz.
Right.
You are identifying how John is negotiating with his reader, demanding that they accept where the weight of reality actually sits.
Yeah, is exegesis.
And as powerful as this is in a single clause, I want to pull the camera way back because one of the biggest struggles for pastors is mapping the macro structure of entire biblical book.
Oh, absolutely. The forest for the trees problem.
Exactly. When you are staring down a 16-chapter epistle, how does this framework help you avoid getting lost in the weeds?
We go right back to that foundational distinction we established earlier, propositions versus proposals.
The truth value versus the action demand.
Remember, propositions are exchanges of information. They build a worldview. Proposals are exchanges of goods and services. They demand action and compliance.
Right.
If you simply track how the author shifts between propositions and proposals across an epistle, the homiletical structure of the entire book maps itself.
Let's apply this to the ultimate test case, Paul's letter to the Romans.
The Everest of epistles.
Right. If you track the discourse analysis through the first 11 chapters, what is Paul doing? He is operating almost exclusively in the realm of propositions.
Heavy propositions.
He is giving dense, heavily argued information. He is making declarative statements. He is meticulously constructing a massive, unassailable theological worldview concerning total depravity, the law, grace, justification, dikaioisene, righteousness, and election.
He is laying down tons and tons of theological steel.
And because it is primarily propositional, the reader's complementary role is to mentally assent. To read Romans 1 through 11 is to be battered by Paul's logic until you finally concede, yes, God is just and I am justified by faith alone.
You're forced to agree with the information.
But then the discourse violently shifts. You hit Romans 12.1 parakalo on humes adelphoi, I appeal to you therefore, brothers.
The rhetoric completely pivots.
Suddenly, Paul stops giving information. He abandons the speech role he has held for 11 chapters. He stops making statements and he begins demanding goods and services. He issues a proposal.
It's not a mild suggestion either. Look at the verb parakaloite, I appeal, I urge, I exhort. In SFL terms, Paul is using an explicit projection of high inclination and high obligation.
He is cashing in every single theological chip he has accumulated over those 11 chapters.
All of them. He takes this massive propositional worldview he just built and leverages it to issue a binding, interactive proposal. Present your bodies as a living sacrifice. He's saying, based on the absolute reality of the information I have given you, I am now demanding that you alter your physical bodily existence. The discourse shifts from the lecture hall to a binding interpersonal contract.
Okay, let's talk about the homiletics of this. What does this mean for you when you step into the pulpit on Sunday morning?
Tone shift.
Yes, it means your tone has to shift. Let me give you an example of bad preaching. We've all heard the guy who preaches Romans 12 with the exact same dry, academic, expository tone that he used to explain Romans 3.
Yeah, painful.
He stands up there and says, now Paul conceptually transitions to the idea of physical dedication. That is a homiletical failure.
It's a failure because it ignores the interpersonal dynamics of the grammar. The text has fundamentally changed its relationship to the audience, but the preacher hasn't.
Exactly. Your congregation needs to feel the shift in the Greek grammar through your English delivery. When you hit Romans 12, you are moving from being the abstract theological teacher to the urgent, pleading pastor holding them to a binding contract based on the mercies of God.
Right. You have to demand the goods and services that Paul is demanding.
The grammar dictates the delivery.
And that leads us perfectly into the next layer of this analysis. Because how we demand those goods and services and how we assert those truths isn't always black and white.
No, it's rarely black and white.
Right. We need to navigate one of the most fascinating areas of Halliday's theory, which is modality.
Modality.
Thus far, we've talked about the absolute poles of communication, positive versus negative, it is versus it isn't, do it versus don't do it.
But as you know from any conversation, human communication rarely exists solely at those absolute extremes.
Right. Most of our communication lives in the gray space between the absolute positive and the absolute negative.
I like to picture modality as a theological volume knob or a dimmer switch on a light.
That's a great visual.
We aren't just flipping a switch on or off. We are dialing in the exact intensity, the exact shade of the author's conviction. It is the space where the speaker expresses their judgment regarding uncertainty or obligation.
Halliday splits this gray space into two distinct semantic routes. And beautifully, they perfectly mirror our division between propositions and proposals.
Oh, of course they do.
When an author is dealing with propositions exchanging information, they use what is called modalization.
Modalization.
Modalization measures two specific things, probability and usuality. Probability is the scale from possibly to probably to certainly. Usuality is the scale from sometimes to usually to always.
So if I stand up and say, the kingdom of God is certainly coming, I am using a high-value modalization of probability. I am not at the absolute positive pole of the kingdom of God is here, but I have the volume knob dialed almost all the way up to certainly.
Right. Now, when we shift to proposals exchanging goods and services, we use modulation.
Modulation.
Modulation measures obligation and inclination. Obligation scales from allowed to supposed to require to. Inclination scales from willing to anxious to determined to.
Now, this is where I need you to slow down because the source material gets incredibly nuanced here.
It does.
Halliday talks about the orientation of modality. It's this idea that a speaker can actually choose to hide themselves or reveal themselves in the grammar when they make a claim. Walk us through this.
This is one of the most powerful tools for spotting how an author asserts authority. There are essentially four orientations.
Okay, what's the first?
First, you have subjective implicit. This is when the speaker uses a simple modal finite like, it must be true. The speaker's judgment is in there, but it's implicit.
Got it.
Second, you have subjective explicit. This is where the speaker steps out from behind the curtain and puts the spotlight on their own mind. I think it is true.
I'm tracking. So what about the objective side?
Third is objective implicit, where the speaker uses an adjunct to hide their subjectivity. It is certainly true.
Okay.
And finally, the strongest form is objective explicit. This is when the speaker uses an impersonal construction to project their opinion as a fact of the universe. It is certain that it is true.
Okay, let's bring this into the biblical text because this orientation is crucial for understanding the rhetoric of Jesus and the apostles.
It really is.
How does the New Testament establish moral or divine necessity without Jesus or Paul just sounding like drill sergeants barking endless orders at people? How do they navigate modulation in Koine Greek?
Well, Koine possesses incredibly robust resources for navigating this gray space of obligation. Instead of constantly using direct imperative commands, which, let's face it, can create interpersonal friction and resistance, the biblical authors frequently utilize impersonal verbs of high-value modulation.
Give us some examples.
The two most famous are de, meaning it is necessary, and lo, meaning one is obligated.
Let's drop right into John chapter 3 to see this ninja move in action.
Oh, perfect text for this.
This is the famous midnight encounter between Jesus and Nicodemus. Nicodemus is a Pharisee, a ruler of the Jews. Jesus looks at him and says, De humas gennethenai ano et don, then. It is necessary for you to be born again. Now, I want to push back on the text here. Why didn't Jesus just use a simple imperative command? He is the Son of God. He has all the authority in the universe. Why didn't he just look at Nicodemus and say, Genethete, be born again?
Consider what happens interpersonally if Jesus uses a direct imperative. If he says, be born again, he's issuing a personal proposal.
Right.
The dynamic becomes, I, Jesus of Nazareth, the man sitting across this table, am commanding you to do this. It creates a direct peer-to-peer conflict. Nicodemus, who considers himself a teacher of Israel, could immediately raise his defenses and argue back, who are you to command me? By what authority are you ordering me around?
The imperative invites an argument about authority.
Exactly. But by opting for de, that impersonal, high-value, modal operator of obligation, Jesus completely circumvents the interpersonal conflict.
Yeah.
He fundamentally shifts the grammatical landscape.
He transforms the clause.
He transforms it from a personal proposal into an objective, cosmic proposition of absolute necessity.
He uses an objective, explicit orientation.
Yes. The modal responsibility is completely lifted off of Jesus as a human speaker in that specific moment. He isn't the one demanding it. The unalterable fabric of divine law is demanding it.
Wow.
Jesus is simply acting as a weather reporter, stating an objective fact about the spiritual architecture of the universe. It is necessary. The cosmos requires it.
Nicodemus can't argue with Jesus because Jesus has grammatically stepped out of the way.
He let the stark necessity of the new birth speak for itself.
The preaching insight here is staggering. Think about how we preach regeneration. So often, preachers get into the pulpit and try to cajole, manipulate, or bark orders at their congregation, trying to command them into spiritual life.
You must choose to be born again. Do it today.
Exactly. But that's not how Jesus framed it. When you preach this, you can preach it exactly how the Greek grammar dictates, as an unyielding, objective reality.
Right.
You aren't commanding them to save themselves. You are revealing the terrifying and beautiful divine necessity of the Spirit's sovereign work. The grammar of day actually protects the doctrine of monergistic grace.
It absolutely does. The grammar is the theology.
It really is.
And if we want to talk about grammar protecting theology, we have to unpack one final concept from Halliday's framework. This is perhaps the most brilliant, sneaky exegetical move the New Testament writers used to build unassailable theological arguments.
I am ready.
We need to talk about the difference between free clauses and bound clauses.
This blew my mind when I first read it. Up to this point in our conversation, we have primarily been discussing free clauses.
Right, the main clauses.
A free clause is the main clause of a sentence. It carries the mood element we talked about earlier. Because it has that structural steel, it is actively negotiated. It is the proposition or proposal that is placed on the table to be affirmed, denied, or debated by the reader.
That's the free clause.
But Halliday points out that language also heavily utilizes bound clauses, which are dependent clauses.
Right. And the critical defining feature of a bound clause is that it is functionally removed from the line of negotiation.
Removed from negotiation. Explain that.
Because it is dependent, it often lacks a fully functioning finite mood element that can be tagged or argued with. Therefore, it is presented by the speaker not as a debatable claim, but as a presumed fact.
So it's not up for debate.
Exactly. It is background information that must be accepted in order to process the free clause.
The theological implications here are massive. The Greek writers of the New Testament masterfully exploit this feature of dependent clauses to smuggle in their most profound theological assumptions.
Smuggling theology. I love that.
By packing a massive doctrine into a bound clause, they leave the reader absolutely no grammatical room to argue it down. They force the reader to swallow the premise whole.
Let's look at a classic text to prove this, Romans 5:8.
Oh, every pastor has preached this text.
But God shows his love for us in that while we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Let's dissect this using discourse analysis. What is the free clause? What is the negotiable proposition Paul is putting on the table?
The free clause, the core architectural steel of his argument is, God shows his love for us, Christ died for us. That is the primary claim.
Right. Paul is putting the love of God and the substitutionary death of Christ on the table for the Roman church to actively embrace, marvel at, and rejoice in.
Now, look at the bound clause. Look at the presumed fact he smuggles right into the middle of that beautiful negotiable assertion. While we were still sinners.
In the Greek, this is ehd hamartolon, oegenton hemoen.
Yes. It's a genitive, absolute participle phrase.
And because it is a non-finite bound clause, it lacks the interactive features of a free clause. There is no finite verb there for the reader to tag.
Exactly.
A Roman reader can't easily jump into the text and say, wait a minute, Paul, hold up. What do you mean sinners? Weren't we actually pretty decent people? Didn't we have a spark of the divine inside us?
They can't do it. The grammar literally does not afford the reader the space to raise that objection.
Paul packs the entire weighty doctrine of total human depravity into a single non-finite bound clause.
He is treating our fundamental sinfulness and rebellion not as a point to be debated, but as an unchallengeable, backgrounded, presumed fact of the universe. He doesn't want to argue about depravity here.
Not at all. He is using it as the dark velvet backdrop upon which he's displaying the dazzling diamond of his primary claim, the unmerited initiating love of God in the cross of Christ.
Let's talk about the pulpit payoff here, because this is where exegesis corrects our homiletics. Let's imagine a pastor stands up to preach Romans 5:8. He reads the text, and then he spends the first 35 minutes of a 40-minute sermon aggressively arguing for human depravity.
Which happens all the time.
He yells at the congregation, trying to convince them of how wretched and sinful they are. He spends all his rhetorical energy fighting a battle on the bound clause. What has he done?
He has completely inverted Paul's grammar. He has taken what Paul treated as a presumed, backgrounded fact and elevated it to the primary point of negotiation while shrinking the glorious declaration of God's love to an afterthought.
Wow. If you preach the bound clause as if it were the free clause, you are literally preaching against the grain of the inspired text.
You are fighting the very discourse you claim to be expositing.
Your homiletical weight should fall exactly where the grammatical weight falls, on the free clause. Your sermon should be a glorious, overwhelming, 35-minute declaration of divine love and substitutionary atonement, resting against the quiet, undeniable backdrop of our unworthiness. Paul doesn't argue for our sin here. He assumes it so he can magnify grace.
That is why we do discourse analysis. This is the whole point of our session today. By applying systemic functional linguistics, we stop looking at Greek texts as dry, morphosyntactic specimens.
We stop treating parsing as an end in itself.
Right. Tracking the mood element, recognizing the profound difference between proposals and propositions, spotting the theological dimmer switch of modulations, and respecting the rhetorical boundaries of bound clauses. Well, all of this reveals the implicit, living power dynamics between the biblical author and the audience.
It shows us what the text is actually doing.
got
It truly breathes the life back into the study. It gives us the blueprint for the house. But as we wrap up the session, I want to turn the mirror around. We have spent this entire time analyzing the Apostle Paul, the Apostle John, and the Lord Jesus. We've mapped out how they use the clause as exchange to shape reality and demand a response. But what about you? What about your own sermon manuscript or your lesson plan for this coming Sunday?
That is the ultimate test, isn't it? If we took Halliday's framework and ran a systemic functional discourse analysis on your own preaching, what would we find in the structural steel of your manuscript?
Ouch.
Right. Are you offering your congregation a series of unanchored propositions with absolutely no modal responsibility? Are you giving them a vague sense of theological information but leaving them with no concrete reality to rest their faith upon?
Or conversely, are you standing in the pulpit barking unmodulated proposals? Do this, stop doing that, be better, try harder, without ever doing the deep theological groundwork of establishing the propositions of the gospel first?
Are you trying to force behavioral proposals without first laying the structural steel of grace?
Language is an event. When you preach, you are initiating a negotiation with your people. Look at your own clauses exchanged this Sunday. Ensure that your homiletical grammar actually matches the grace, the tone, and the gravity of the text you are called to herald.
What a brilliant, penetrating challenge to leave us with. Don't just analyze the text. Let the grammatical architecture of the text analyze your preaching.
Go grab your Greek New Testament, open up to your passage for this week, and start mapping the discourse. Find the structural steel, have a great week in the study, and we will see you next time for another deep dive into the text.